Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to be taking a look at what training programs are out there for young people to help them develop leadership skills and to really move not only our country but the world forward. My guest today is an expert on this topic. When it comes to tackling complex global issues from labor rights to economic and social development, my next guest has been in the room when it happens. For over 4 decades, Kevin Cassidy has held senior roles within the United Nations system, the International Labor Organization, and has consulted for the World Bank. He is currently an executive fellow at the Iacocca Institute at Lehigh University, and as he is a co-founder of IC1 Global. Kevin Cassidy, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Bill. Glad to be here.
I appreciate you being with me. Why don't we start off? We'll get into the World Bank in just a moment, but very briefly, what is your connection with the Lehigh University and in particular, the Global Village Program? Is that what it's called? And UN partnership?
Right, exactly. So, it's quite interesting. When I was at the ILO, my niece had recommended that I speak to her class because they wanted someone to talk about the UN because they were making their application for ECOSOC consultative status. And since that time, 20 years ago, I have been working with Lehigh and Lehigh students at the UN, going to their university, running model ILOs in the schools, celebrating our centenary there. So it's been a great and a long partnership that I've really valued.
Very good. Excellent. Now, I don't know about Lehigh University, but in my experiences of traveling around the country, and maybe you've had the same experiences, and even other places in the world, I find that more people outside of the United States know more about the United Nations than people in the United States. Has that been your experience?
It's true. I think a lot of people in the US like to feel that we're very internationalized because we can travel, because we consume goods and art and movies and books from around the world. But I think people from around the world are very interested in how to connect better. US being one connection for them, and of course, we in the US believe that we have it all here. So at the Iacocca Institute for Entrepreneurship and Leadership, which is based at Lehigh University, for 30 years they have been developing programs for global leaders. Through these transformative and hands-on programs. So it is about fostering leadership, entrepreneurship, cross-cultural collaboration, and its flagship program, the Global Village, brings together young professionals from around the world. So you may have something like 50 people in the room from as many countries asking about, what is happening at the United Nations? How does the American economy work? Is the U.S. Fully involved in the UN system? How are we looking at these development issues? Where are the opportunities in the future? And having this as sort of immersive experience ultimately builds a global network of alumni for Lehigh to thrive in an interconnected world. So it's a rather amazing opportunity for many of the people around the world to come into the United States, travel around the U.S. as well, to know more about the US. So it sort of de-escalates any of the suspicions they may have. So it's one of these really fantastic programs that I'm very proud to be a part of.
Yes. And of course, we can remember many of the really almost comical myths about the United Nations, about the black helicopters that are going to swoop into Washington, D.C., which was total nonsense. I think the John Birch people put that out, if I'm not mistaken. That was one of their mainstays. But there's so many myths about the United Nations. It's just absolutely to the point of being ridiculous. It just absolutely unbelievable, I should say. Well, that's a good transition to take us into your next program. Now, you were co-founder and you're a principal of the IC1 Global, and you do some of the same work, do you not, as far as providing leadership and training to deal with complex international issues and that type of thing? How does that work?
Right. So what I'm doing with the IC1 Global, in conjunction with a colleague of mine in Geneva, Mr. Wayalisa, is very much what the Lehigh University through the Iacocca Institute do. So it's really trying to give young students, young professionals, an opportunity to see a wider world around them, to take a look at sort of what are the skill sets that they need to be successful in this world. So on my 40th anniversary at the UN system, I decided I've committed enough of my life now to move outside of those confines and really help students, start to chart their career paths using technology, using the experiences that I have gained to be able to transition that to them in their knowledge base and to develop these sort of foundational skills that are required for leadership. I mean, today, I think many businesses beyond the UN system are looking for these key cognitive skills. And, we've structured the work that we do with students and with young professionals around what we call this kind of, pillars of the future-proof skill set. So, as you go into your professional life, I mean, you'll have to have domain knowledge, whether it's being a lawyer, an engineer, an architect, an accountant, you need to know about that particular activity. However, there are a series of cognitive skills which are not always taught at university, and sometimes, a byproduct of your sort of engagement with different people when you're moving out of your home and going into a university environment. So the three pillars for us that we try through IC1 Global to impart on students and also to work with companies, to work with the UN system, to be able to train young people around the world on, firstly, social emotional intelligence, looking at empathy and perspective taking, looking at cultural competence, collaborative teamwork, relationship management. This is essential if you're going to operate effectively in an international environment. The second pillar in this toolkit is strategic judgment and complex problem solving. Here we're talking about critical thinking, adaptability, creative judgment, policy analysis, and systems thinking. Critical thinking and civil discourse, they go together. And what better of a time today for not only people around the world, but in the US to know a bit more about the other side of the conversation, not to get upset about things. How do we understand these issues? How do we sort of look at our assumptions and really sort of, go through the rigor analysis of that to kind of say, is this something that holds true? And to be able to have that conversation without it devolving into arguments or just saying, well, we agree to disagree, which is a failure in and of itself. The third pillar that we look at IC1 Global is leadership, persuasion, and communication. So negotiation and consensus building is absolutely essential to what the UN system is all about. And this system that we've put together has practical applications, model ILOs. How do tripartite, government, workers, and employers, sit down together and negotiate? What are their perspectives? What are their red lines? How are we being able to move forward? How do we build consensus? How do we find points of contention that we can address? And so added to that is evidence-based argumentation. You can't just come off and say, well, I don't think that that's the right answer. Well, what is your argumentation? What is the background that you have? What are the experiences that you have been through? How can we provide you with opportunities to be able to dig more deeply into these issues and to have a conversation that is productive, that has a resolution, that is obviously not, everything that we both want, but it's enough of what we both want that we can actually move forward. And that's how we move forward through consensus and also through strategic influence. If we are, in fact, developing all these skills, how do we apply that? What is that for? So with the students, we are talking about careers, not only at the UN, because today you could work for a company. There are human rights lawyers that are needed. There are people who understand labor and trade negotiation prerogatives. What are the issues that we're looking at there? There are non-governmental organizations. There are academic institutions. So understanding the strategic ability that you have to be able to influence others in those arenas is actually quite important. So we're bringing that all together, not only in training on the skills, and the skills are quite important. We need to know that in our discussions, that we have to listen to the other person. We have to do our homework. We have to understand what's going on. How are we moving that forward? And with that, I've been working and very gracious colleague up in Cornell ILR, has been working with us on a skills development. So the idea about laying the groundwork for effective engagement through discovery, having that argument, developing and presenting those problems in a way that looks for resolutions and negotiation by managing and understanding multilateral negotiations, understanding what the other side is looking at. What are the formal procedures? What are the informal procedures? How do we engage at different levels? So for me, this is an immersive program that I'm very passionate about. We are looking for people to come and help us fund this, but we want to also work with local schools, particularly at the high school level, because we want to have people, future leaders, have the skills that they need to be successful, not only for themselves, but for us as well.
Exactly. Well, it certainly sounds like a comprehensive program, and it's one that we certainly need. Do you have a website, or how do people get in touch with you? Can they just Google IC1, or how does that work?
Right. As a tech person myself, I hate to admit the website is still in development, but it will be up soon. So to remember it, it's IC1 Global. It's a bit of a play. Mr. Wael Iser is the Kevin Cassidy, I'm the C. And one global means that we see the world working together. But that stay tuned. The website is coming, and I'll come
Great.
back on your program when it's
Yeah,
up and
please
running.
do. It sounds like a wonderful program, and it's one that we really need, especially younger people, because today we're moving into a world, as I see it, of just making blanket statements without any proof, without evidence. We have governmental officials saying, well, we need to do this. Well, why? We're blowing up ships down in the Caribbean off the coast of Venezuela. Why? Where is the documentation? Where's the evidence that there's been some wrongdoing? And we're not, it's almost getting to I think we're dumbing down, and to be quite honest. I mean, we're getting dumber by the day, but we're going to get back to that in just a moment. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. I invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, all the opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. If you're involved with a PBS or a community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have, let's say, a podcast or a computer, and you like our shows, please feel free to share them. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues. Well, today we're talking about a capacity building, training, helping young people better understand these issues. And we're also going to be talking about human trafficking. My guest is an expert on all of these topics. Kevin Cassidy has held several senior roles within the United Nations system, the International Labor Organization, and has consulted for the World Bank. Kevin, we're talking about so many topics here, trying to get all this out in a very short time frame. Let's go. We were talking about the issues out there. Let's move right into one of the really thorniest that I think we've ever dealt with, and that's one that you've dealt with at the World Bank, and that's human trafficking, child and forced labor. That's probably been going on since the beginning of time, I'm guessing, with a small village of two or three people, or maybe more. But what were you doing at the World Bank? What did you do in this particular area? And I think you worked in Uzbekistan. Is that correct? You were involved in studies and
That's right.
activities there. Okay, but you know about it, so please tell me.
Sure. So, in the international arena, different institutions have different strengths. And for example, the World Bank is a leading developer in terms of social and economic development issues. They are a lender to countries and help to have them graduate from low economic development to medium and hopefully high income countries. And a country like Uzbekistan, for example, when it had separated at the time from the Soviet Union, one of its main exports was cotton. It was identified as a fertile place to grow cotton. And as such, they were exporting, a lot of great cotton. They have what some people call the best cotton in the world, white gold. And the problem that they faced, unfortunately, was that, there was no market mechanism because they had been a former communist country that was centrally planned. And now they wanted to go into the kind of global market economy. So how do you do that? Do you just transition directly? So in order to pick the cotton, they were using old techniques, which is forcing people, right? Compelling people to do the work. So child and forced labor, it was basically sold to many in the population as your national duty. Now, we've seen that in the US where people pick potatoes in Idaho or pick tomatoes out in Long Island or other places as well, too. And that's a part of, some people feel, the civic duty. But there it was an institutionalized form of abuse. And in that case, there were 2.3 million people that were forced to pick cotton in order for when the harvest came in. With that, the World Bank had come in with the ILO as a partner on the social side and on the worker side, and with a number of donors, the Swiss government, the German government, the EU, and the United States Department of State, had worked together, consolidated their money, and actually started working towards reforming the agricultural sector, but also getting rid of these old vestiges of the communist system. So they were, developing legislation. They were changing their agricultural procedures. They were increasing their yields. They were introducing new techniques. Now, nothing happens overnight. It means a change of culture. It means a change of ways of operating. And when you have the same people in those jobs that did it the old way, it's kind of hard to make that change. So what we had seen over the course of years through the engagement of the ILO and the World Bank, and of course the donor itself, which was willing to, the country itself, the recipient, Uzbekistan, was willing to make changes. They were changing their law. They were making forced labor illegal. They were making child labor illegal. They were stopping all of these procedures. They were putting penalties on their regional governors and so who were still using this. And after 7 years, we started seeing changes. We identified the problem. We introduced, and through the World Bank and the governments that have had submitted money to these projects, we saw the changes taking place. And as the yields went up and the amount of money that each picker would make, the market mechanism worked. Surprise, surprise. And forced labor and child labor vanished almost entirely. Now, there are still some problems. In 2022, forced labor and child labor had been declared over. There are some vestiges in places around there, as there are in many other places, but they went from 2.3 million down to 1,000 workers being forced. So my job with the World Bank at that time was to look at what worked. What were the key inflection points? How did this happen? So the key success factors, just to kind of go through them very quickly, was a very strong government, donor, and organizational commitment. The Uzbek government, driven by the president's vision, had ended child labor in the eyes of the international community. Again, there are some vestiges, and that is still being looked at. The receptiveness to change and adaptive management. So they started changing the way in which they were operating. Not every country can do this. We get stuck in our ways. We're seeing that happen now at the UN with the UN 80 initiative that's taking place, which we can talk about in a while. Balancing the benefits of action. Right? If this is a successful implementation, who is winning? And it showed that the economy was winning, that people were winning, that people had, disposable income. They were able to bring themselves out of poverty. It was also about optimizing the partnership between that skill complementarity. The ILO knew very well how to work with the workers, how to work at the ground level. The World Bank knew very well about agricultural reform. It knew very well what to invest in, what to make those recommendations on. And of course, the Uzbek government itself had a vision about what its future was. And then, of course, transparent communication and accountability. My role initially was with the ILO, where I was the director here, and I would meet senior government officials in Washington, go to meetings with them, communicate the work that has taken place on the ground, have the hard discussions, but they did the work. The government of Uzbekistan did the hard work, and they are the ones who made the change. So that to me was an amazing development success. And people who work in the UN and work in international development, that these successes are not always seen because we are process people. We try to change the way in which we act. And this was an amazing opportunity to reflect on what worked and how we can apply that to other challenges like child labor in the coca industry or to forced labor in the cattle industry in the Chaco region in Uruguay. So there were many things that we've learned about this, which is now being applied across the board to other development projects.
Mhm. That is so important. Sounds to me like he brought all the players together, the government, the businesses, and the employees to the tripartite system, like you had at the International Labor Organization, to work on this problem and to get agreement from all of them. Without that agreement, it probably would not have worked, would it?
No, and I mean, I would have to also give credit to the NGO community. The Cotton Campaign had a very successful boycott where over 300 companies had signed on to a boycott not to buy Uzbek cotton. And also the EU had blocked it, and as well as in the US. There are a number of provisions in the US which don't allow products made with forced labor or child labor into the United States. So there was a incentive for the government in order to participate in this. They saw the benefit in it. They were forced in many ways because the cotton was not being sold at the highest price. They needed to make changes. And now cotton is no longer the biggest export of the country. It's now gold and it's now other items. It's transportation. It is technology. They are moving in ways that they never thought possible before. And they needed that break from the past in order to see a better future for themselves. And they took that opportunity. So congratulations to the government for doing that.
Hmm. Kudos all around, that's for sure. Very good. Might just remind our viewers too that the World Bank is one of those institutions that does not get a lot of publicity along with the International Monetary Fund, but they were created at the Bretton Woods Agreement. And so you might want to Google that or go to it, pull it up. But they're both fascinating institutions and they've evolved over the years quite dramatically. But we're just about out of time, Kevin. In the last minute or so, you mentioned UN 80. That's not much time. We may have to come back to talk about that. But the UN has been critical in all of these discussions. You don't hear about it. The UN agencies basically kept a large number of Ukrainians alive for the last 3 years or more. The UN is involved in just about every conflict that I can think of and playing a role, usually behind the scenes, not leading the charge, but behind the scenes. But what were you going to say about UN 80 in a minute or so? And if we have to, we'll come back to talk about it.
Yeah, Bill, I would love the opportunity to come back and talk about it because it's still a evolving story. Effectively, the UN system has been reforming itself since it started. Everybody has a better mousetrap that they want to see the UN to be. The UN has been going through changes, but also the UN has been belabored by agenda items, which means basically that the UN is a member-driven organization, a member state-driven organization. It does what the member states want. We have 193 member states today. When it was signed, the UN Charter had 51 countries a part of that. So with the growth of the importance of the UN, so does the agenda items. But they started doing something clever about 20 years ago. And instead of giving more money for the new priorities that they wanted, they said within existing resources, which meant that you had to use the money you already had to do more and more and more and more. And those who know the Sustainable Development Goals realize that that is not something that's going to be done just by tagging it on to the activities. So I think the UN is both at a fiscal crisis, which it is facing right now. I think there's something like $32.8 billion that is owed to the UN by its member states. The member states control the Security Council, but there is a bit of a deadlock in the Security Council. Africa and Latin America and other regions want to have Asia, want to have their own presence in the Security Council, but that is not happening. So that is going alongside the revision of how we look at development, how we're going to move forward. I'd have to say, for most people, you don't think about the UN except for the blue helmets or humanitarian. When was the last time someone has walked into a big box store and said, "Hey, I got a product at a great price"? They didn't turn around and say the World Trade Organization has done a great job by regulating international commerce. When people go into a hotel halfway around the world and link into Wi-Fi, they don't say, the International Telecommunications Organization is doing a great job by setting those standards for the radio spectrums in which Wi-Fi works. People don't go through the airports with their passports or do retinal scans and go flying through security, getting to their plane on time. They don't say the International Civil Aviation Organization is very efficient in developing standards and proliferating that around the world. So people don't really understand that the UN is a part of their everyday life, and they do things that are behind the scenes and to make their life better. They only see the failures. And unfortunately, the only people who can actually change the failures of the organization are the member states themselves. The people who are there are dedicated, they're working hard, and we need to reprioritize what we do. But at the end of the day, people who work at the UN are very dedicated, they work very hard, and it may seem like a glamorous life, but having done it for 40 years, it's a lot of hard work.
I was going to say you were 10 years old when you started. This really sums it up. And the United Nations, the agencies help move, well, you mentioned aircraft, ships, cruise ships, freighters, hauling freight, what have you, weather information, mail, all of this. These are all UN agencies that help to move this around the world safely. And we don't know it. And this is all part of what I was referencing a few minutes ago. And I hate to be negative, but we really are dumbing down because we don't understand what the UN does, how it touches our lives. I'm reminded of a statement, I think it was Dag Hammarskjöld, the second Secretary General of the UN. He said, the UN was created not to take us to heaven, but to save us from hell, as I recall. But Kevin
Indeed.
Cassidy, I want to thank you so much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm Bill Miller. You're watching Global Connections Television. Thank you for joining us today.